Elara is dead weight. I need a queen by my side, not a shadow. I stood outside the office door, listening to the man I loved plan my replacement. Julian thinks I'm just a trophy who can't understand a spreadsheet. He thinks he's the self-made genius of Silicon Alley. He has no idea that every line of code in his empire was written by my hand. He doesn't know I'm the anonymous billionaire who funded his entire life. I am EV. I am Vance Holdings. And while he's planning a graceful breakup, I'm finalizing his total destruction. Subscribe to see the shadow step into the light and take back what's hers.
The air in the ballroom smelled of expensive cologne and chilled champagne. Crystals from the massive chandeliers scattered light across the room, reflecting off the sharp tuxedos and silk gowns of New York's elite. It was the 5th anniversary of Thorne Media, and the energy was electric. Elara Vance stood half a step behind Julian Thorne, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She wore a champagne-colored silk dress that matched her quiet demeanor perfectly. To the photographers, she was the supportive fiancé, a beautiful accessory to the man of the hour. "It's all about the vision," Julian told a circle of investors, his voice booming with confidence. "When I wrote the initial framework for the Thorne algorithm, I knew it would change the industry. It wasn't just about the code, it was about the soul I put into it." The investors nodded in awe. Julian flashed his signature golden boy smile, the one that had graced the cover of 3 different tech magazines this year. He didn't mention that Elara had written that framework over a weekend while he was at a golf retreat. He didn't mention that she had spent the last 5 years refining every line of code that kept his empire running. Suddenly, the massive LED screen behind the stage flickered. The data visualization, the centerpiece of the presentation, stuttered and began to bleed into a mess of red error codes. The room went quiet. Julian's smile faltered, his grip on his glass tightening. "Just a technical hiccup," Julian laughed nervously, glancing toward the wings of the stage. Elara didn't panic. She reached into her small clutch and pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved with rhythmic precision, tapping a sequence into a custom app that looked like a simple meal planner. 10 seconds later, the screen hissed back to life, the data flowing more smoothly than before. Julian exhaled, his chest puffing out again. "See, my team is the best in the business," he said, taking the credit without a glance at Elara. Later that night, the gala shifted to a private after-party. Elara stepped away to find Julian, wanting to tell him she was heading home. She walked toward his private office, but the door was slightly ajar. She stopped when she heard a feminine laugh. It was Chloe, the firm's ambitious PR director. "The merger with the Sterling Group is almost finalized, Julian, but we need to talk about your image. A global CEO needs a certain kind of partner, someone formidable, not a shadow." "I know." Julian's voice was cold, stripped of the warmth he used for the cameras. "Elara is a sweet girl, but she's dead weight. She doesn't have the stomach for this world. She thinks our biggest problem is a server glitch. Once the merger is signed, I'll end the engagement gracefully. I need a queen by my side, Chloe, not a ghost." Elara stood in the hallway, her expression unreadable. She didn't cry. She didn't feel the urge to scream. Instead, she looked at her reflection in a nearby mirror. For the first time in years, she saw the dead weight Julian described, and she realized it was a mask she had built for herself. She turned to leave, but Julian stepped out of the office, nearly bumping into her. He didn't look guilty, he looked annoyed. "Oh, Elara, good. I was looking for you." He pulled a thick folder from his leather briefcase. "I need you to sign this. It's a pre-merger agreement, just some standard paperwork to keep the investors happy before the wedding. It protects us both." He handed her a pen, his eyes full of a condescending sort of affection. He was so certain she wouldn't read it. He was so sure she would just do as she was told. Elara looked at the document. It wasn't a standard agreement. It was an ironclad NDA and a total waiver of any intellectual property rights. If she signed this, she would effectively be erased from the history of the company she had built. Elara looked up at him, her face a mask of calm. "You want me to sign this now?" "The sooner the better, darling. I have a big day tomorrow. I need this handled." Elara took the pen. A small, cold smile touched her lips, one that Julian didn't notice. "Of course, Julian. Let's get this handled."
The pen felt cold in Elara's hand, the weight of the gold casing familiar and heavy. Julian stood over her, his reflection caught in the polished mahogany of his desk. He smelled of expensive scotch and the arrogance of a man who thought he had already won. "Just there on the last page, Elara," he said, tapping the paper with a manicured finger. "It's mostly just legal jargon. It ensures that when we're married, the company's assets stay protected for our future. You understand, don't you?" "I understand perfectly, Julian," Elara said softly. She leaned down and signed, but she didn't use the looped feminine signature she used for greeting cards or dinner reservations. She used a sharp, precise mark, a digital-ready signature registered to Vance Holdings, a multi-billion-dollar shell entity he had never bothered to investigate. By signing this way, she wasn't waiving her rights. She was effectively linking his company's IP to her own private firm through a merger of interests clause he hadn't noticed on page 42. "Good girl," Julian said, snatching the folder as soon as she finished. He didn't even look at the signature. He tucked it into his briefcase, already checking his phone for a flight confirmation. "I have to head to London for the final sterling negotiations. I'll be back in 3 days. Use the time to pick out some flowers for the wedding, okay? Something expensive." He kissed her forehead, a distracted, clinical gesture, and walked out. Elara waited until the sound of his footsteps faded down the hall. She didn't stay in the office to mourn. She went back to their shared apartment, a sprawling glass box overlooking Central Park that she had paid for through a series of anonymous transfers. She didn't pack everything. She left the champagne-colored dresses, the delicate jewelry he had bought her to match his brand, and the trophy persona he adored. She packed only her sleek black laptop, a single encrypted drive, and a small encrypted drive. By 4 a.m., the apartment felt like a museum, cold, empty, and staged. Elara pulled up a secure messaging app. "Initiate Phase 1, she typed. "Liquidate the Thorne Media secondary accounts and trigger the backdoor sequence." A moment later, a reply blinked back. "Confirmed, EV. Where are you heading?" Elara stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the sunrise hit the New York skyline. For 5 years, she had been the foundation beneath Julian. Today, she was taking the ground with her. "I'm going home," she whispered. An hour later, Elara arrived at a high-tech penthouse in Tribeca. This wasn't a domestic space, it was a command center, filled with sleek monitors and a view that made Julian's apartment look like a starter home. She had owned this building for 3 years. She stripped off the champagne silk dress, letting it fall to the floor like a shed skin. She stepped into a sharp, charcoal gray power suit. As she looked in the mirror, the shadow was gone. In her place was EV, the most powerful person in the industry that no one had ever seen. She opened her laptop and watched the live stock tickers. Thorne Media was already beginning to dip. "Let's see how long you last without your dead weight, Julian," she said, her voice steady and cold. Her phone buzzed. It was a frantic text from Julian. The server is lagging again. Elara, are you awake? I need you to check that recipe app of yours, now." Elara didn't reply. Instead, she blocked his number. The first domino had fallen, and Julian Thorne had no idea he was the one standing at the end of the line.
The silence of the Tribeca penthouse was a luxury Elara hadn't realized she was missing. There were no booming phone calls from Julian, no frantic demands for her to find his misplaced cufflinks, and no expectation to play the role of the quiet, supportive fiancé. She sat at a sleek, minimalist workstation, her eyes scanning 3 monitors. The glitches Julian was experiencing weren't the result of a hack, they were simply what happened when the architect stopped holding up the ceiling. For years, Elara had been running a background script that optimized Thorne Media's server traffic in real time. She had turned it off the moment she walked out the door. Her phone buzzed on the desk. It wasn't Julian, she had already scrubbed him from her personal life. It was Marcus, the CTO of Thorne Media. "Elara?" Marcus's voice was hushed, sounding like he was hiding in a stairwell. "Julian is losing his mind in London. The Sterling Group merger is stalling because the platform keeps crashing. He's telling everyone it's a temporary maintenance window, but I know better. He's looking for you. He says you're not answering." Elara leaned back in her chair, a cup of black coffee in her hand. "I won't find me, Marcus, and I won't find the fix for those servers. I didn't just write that code. I am the only one who knows how to keep it from eating itself." "I knew it," Marcus breathed, a note of admiration in his voice. "I always suspected you were the one doing the heavy lifting. Julian doesn't know a line of Python from a grocery list. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to give you a choice," Elara said, her voice steady and professional. "You can stay on a sinking ship, or you can come work for the person who actually built the boat. Vance Tech is launching its own infrastructure wing on Monday. I want you as my chief of operations." There was a long silence on the other end. "Vance Tech? Your EV?" "I am. And by the end of the month, I'll own Thorne Media's debt. If you want to be on the right side of history, meet me at the Pierre Hotel in an hour." "I'll be there," Marcus said, without hesitation. Later that afternoon, Elara stepped into the lobby of the Pierre. She had traded her champagne silks for a structured charcoal gray power suit and a pair of sharp black heels. Her hair, usually kept in soft, approachable waves, was pulled back into a sleek, tight ponytail. She didn't hide in the corners anymore. She walked straight to a reserved table where 2 of the industry's biggest venture capitalists were waiting. They had spent months trying to get a meeting with the mysterious EV of Vance Holdings. "Miss Vance?" one of the men asked, standing up in surprise. "We were expecting... Well, we weren't sure what to expect. We've heard so much about your firm's aggressive move into the sector. I prefer to let my results speak for me, but today I'm here to discuss the future of the Sterling merger, or rather, why that merger is about to fail." As she spoke, she laid out a digital map of Julian's financial vulnerabilities. She wasn't just a coder, she was a predator who knew exactly where the armor was thinnest. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the shadow behind the man. She was the light that was about to burn him. While Elara was securing the loyalty of Julian's biggest investors, Julian was landing back in New York. He stormed into their shared apartment, ready to demand why Elara hadn't been answering his calls, only to find the space eerily still. He walked into the bedroom, expecting to find her. Instead, he found the champagne-colored dress she had worn to the gala draped over a chair, looking like a discarded ghost. The closets were half empty. His safe partner was gone. His phone rang. It was his lead investor, sounding panicked.
"Julian, we have a problem. Someone just bought out 40% of our outstanding debt, and they're calling for an emergency board meeting. They're claiming Thorne Media is technically insolvent." Julian gripped the edge of the dresser, his face pale. Who? Who bought it? "A firm called Vance Holdings," the investor replied. "They're moving for a hostile takeover, Julian. You need to get down here now." Julian dropped the phone. The name Vance echoed in his head, but he brushed it off. He still didn't make the connection. He thought it was a coincidence, a shark smelling blood in the water. He didn't realize the shark was the woman he called dead weight only 48 hours ago.
The rain began to blur the New York skyline, turning the city into a wash of gray and charcoal. Inside the boardroom of Thorne Media, the atmosphere was even colder. Julian Thorne paced the length of the glass-walled room, his reflection looking haggard and desperate. "Where is she?" Julian barked, pointing his phone at Chloe. "I've called Elara 40 times. Her phone is disconnected, her social media is gone. It's like she vanished into thin air." Chloe sat at the long table, her usual composure cracking. "Julian, forget about Elara. She's a ghost. We have a much bigger problem. Vance Holdings has triggered a default of confidence clause. Because our tech has been failing for 48 hours straight, they have the legal right to force an immediate buyback of your shares. The board meeting starts in 20 minutes. Julian stopped pacing and let out a harsh, jagged laugh. "Vance Holdings. Some anonymous shark thinks they can just walk in here and take my chair? They don't know who I am. I'm the face of this industry. I'll walk into that room, I'll charm them, and I'll offer them a seat at the table. Money always talks." He adjusted his silk tie, trying to find the golden boy in the mirror. But the dark circles under his eyes told a different story. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, because he hadn't. Every time he tried to access the Thorne algorithm to fix the glitches, the system locked him out with a message that chilled him to the bone. "Unauthorized access. Architect signature required." Meanwhile, across town, in the Tribeca penthouse, the air was silent and focused. Marcus stood by the window, watching the rain. He turned as Elara walked into the room. She was wearing a tailored navy blue power suit that fit her like armor. Her expression was calm, her movements precise. She wasn't the girl who stayed in the background anymore. She looked like the storm itself. "The legal team is downstairs," Marcus said, his voice full of respect. "We have the signed merger documents from the Sterling Group. They've officially jumped ship from Julian and signed with Vance Tech." Elara nodded, sliding a slim tablet into her leather portfolio. "And the debt?" 100% acquired, Marcus replied. "Julian thinks he's going into a negotiation. He doesn't realize he's going into a funeral." Elara walked over to a small table and picked up her watch, a simple, elegant piece she had bought with her first secret dividend years ago. "Julian always said I didn't have the stomach for this world. He thought my silence was weakness. He never understood that the loudest person in the room is usually the one with the most to lose." She looked at Marcus, her eyes sharp and clear. "Are you ready to show them who really built this empire?" "I've been waiting 5 years for this, EV," said Marcus with a grin. Back at Thorne Media, the board members had already gathered. The air was thick with tension. The investors were whispering, their faces grim. Julian sat at the head of the table, his hands folded, projecting a mask of supreme confidence. "Gentlemen," Julian said, his voice smooth and rehearsed, "I know there's been some volatility, but Thorne Media is my soul. We are the future.
Whoever this EV is from Vance Holdings, they clearly want to be part of our success. I welcome the dialogue." The heavy double doors at the end of the boardroom swung open. The room went silent. The clicking of heels against the marble floor echoed like a countdown. A team of 6 high-powered lawyers entered first, flanking the entrance. Then a figure stepped through the center. Julian's smile didn't just fade, it evaporated. He stood up so quickly his chair screeched against the floor. "Elara?" he stammered, his voice cracking. "What are you doing here? This is a private board meeting. You can't just—" Elara didn't stop until she reached the opposite end of the table. She didn't look like the woman he had dismissed 2 days ago. She looked like the person who owned the room. She didn't say a word. She simply opened her portfolio and slid a single black card across the polished wood. On the card, in embossed silver letters, were 2 words: Vance Holdings. "Sit down, Julian," Elara said, her voice quiet, but carrying a weight that silenced the entire room. Julian's eyes darted between Elara and the high-powered lawyer standing behind her. He tried to let out a scoff, but it came out as a weak, jagged breath. The board members were deathly silent, their eyes fixed on the woman they had spent 5 years ignoring at cocktail parties. "Elara, stop this," Julian said, his voice dropping to a low, warning hiss. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing or whose clothes you're wearing, but you're embarrassing yourself. This is a billion-dollar negotiation. Go home. We'll talk about this tonight." Elara didn't flinch. She took a seat at the head of the table, the place Julian considered his throne. She moved with a deliberate, calm grace that made his frantic energy look amateur. "I am home, Julian," Elara said, her voice clear and cool, "and we aren't negotiating. I'm here to exercise my rights as the primary creditor and majority stakeholder of Thorne Media." Julian turned to the lead investor, his face turning a blotchy red. "Are you hearing this? She's delusional. She's my fiancé. She doesn't have a penny that I didn't give her." The investor, a man who had always treated Elara like a decorative plant, looked down at the tablet in front of him. His hands were shaking. "Julian, these signatures on the debt acquisition, they aren't from a stranger. They match the digital signature on the pre-merger agreement you filed yesterday. It's all linked to an entity called Vance Holdings." Julian froze. He remembered the moment in his office, handing her the pen, calling her a good girl as she signed the document he thought would strip her of everything. "You signed it," Julian whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "You signed it as the CEO of Vance Holdings," Elara replied, leaning forward. "The same entity that provided your seed Series A and B funding, the same entity that owns this building. You've spent 5 years wondering who your silent architect was. You're looking at her." The room erupted into hushed, frantic murmurs. Julian looked around the table, desperate for an ally, but he found only cold stares. Even Chloe, standing by the door, was slowly backing away, her eyes wide with shock. "It's a lie!" Julian shouted, slamming his hands on the table. "I wrote the code. I built the soul of this company." "You built the PR, Julian," Elara countered. She opened her laptop and turned it toward the board. "I wrote every line of the Thorne algorithm, and because I built it with a modular backdoor that only my signature can unlock, the system is currently offline. Without me, Thorne Media is just a collection of expensive furniture and broken promises." She looked at the board members. "You have a choice. You can stay with a man who can't fix his own servers, or you can vote to finalize the hostile takeover by Vance Tech. I have Marcus and the entire engineering team already on board. We can have the system live and the Sterling merger restored in 10 minutes, but only if Julian Thorne is removed from the premises." The vote took less than 60 seconds. It was unanimous. Julian stood frozen as security approached him. He looked at Elara, his golden boy mask completely shattered. "You trapped me," he rasped. "You let me believe I was in charge while you were planning this." I didn't have to plan much, Julian. I just had to wait for you to prove exactly who you are. You told Chloe I was dead weight. You told the world I didn't have the stomach for this. The truth is, I've been running this world while you were just posing for the photos." She stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "You're trespassing in my office, Julian. Please leave." 6 months later, the ballroom at the Pierre Hotel was once again filled with New York's elite, but the banners didn't say Thorne Media. They featured the sleek silver logo of Vance Tech. Elara stood at the top of the grand staircase. She wasn't wearing champagne silk, and she wasn't standing half a step behind anyone. She wore a sharp midnight blue gown that flowed like liquid power. She walked onto the stage, the applause thunderous. She didn't look for a man to lead her or a partner to validate her. She looked out at the audience and saw a front row filled with young women, the first recipients of her new foundation for women in tech. "They used to call me a lucky charm," Elara told the crowd, her voice steady and commanding. "They said I was the shadow behind a genius, but shadows don't build empires. Architects do." She smiled, a genuine, radiant look of a woman who was finally seen. "I'm Elara Vance, and I'm just getting started."